Welcome to the Old Ways for the New Age podcast, where we weave the threads of traditional living into the tapestry of modern day life. I'm Hannah Forrest, a herbalist and naturopath with a deep love for plants, seasons, and the quiet rituals that shape how we live and care for ourselves. This podcast is an invitation to slow down and reconnect with the wisdom of the natural world through herbal medicine, folklore, seasonal living, ritual, astrology, and simple earth-honoring practices that can be gently folded into everyday life. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. I wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and record, the Wandjarabara people. I honour their enduring connection to the lands, waters, and communities, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode. I had the best time speaking with this week's guest. I had the fantastic opportunity to sit down with Amma Rosavalon, also known as Mama Amma on Instagram. She's one of my favorite accounts and I absolutely love the way that she approaches herbalism. I feel like we have so many similarities between us. I felt like she was a kindred spirit, and we actually sat down to talk about bringing whimsy back into herbalism and the place that joy and delight and pleasure and just fun has in a herbal practice. Amma shares a bit about her story, how she was raised, and how she got into herbalism. And then we really cover plant spirit stories. We cover some of her closest plant allies. We cover the science behind why, whimsy and the enjoyment of herbalism and the enjoyment of life can actually affect your physiology and affect the way that your brain works. I think that there are so many nuggets of wisdom in this episode. So if you are really feeling the weight of the world at the moment, which I think a lot of us are, and if you've been having a really tough few weeks with the celestial goings on, I think that this is the perfect medicine for that. I think that if you need a little bit of hope and you need a little bit of a reset, that this episode and this conversation is really going to be like a balm for your soul. So definitely, if you haven't checked out Amma on Instagram before, it's mama.amma, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes as usual. But if you are, the kind of person who enjoys a really good herbal meme, then I think her page is for you. And, she has some fantastic courses. Her main course is actually launching, her membership is relaunching at the end of this month. And so you have a couple of weeks to go over, check it out, see if it might be for you. But again, if you're a beginner in particular, I think that this is a fantastic way to begin your herbal journey. And Amma is clearly such a fantastic teacher. I have no notes, like everything I've seen her share on her pages are just, it's perfect information. The way she approaches energetics is great. And so I do have complete confidence in her as an instructor. So if that is something you're actually currently looking for, because that is probably the biggest question I get asked in my DMs is, I'm thinking about studying, like who should I study with? What should I study? I think that this would be a great starting off point. And I mean, I would even love to do her course. So I don't think that it is, or her membership. So I don't think it's limited to, just beginners. And she says this too at the end of the podcast. So yeah, if you're looking for any of that info in the show notes, but otherwise just sit back, relax, and really take a moment to let all of this wash over you. And I hope that you take away something that makes the rest of your week better. Hey, Amma, it's so nice to have you with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
I love everything that you do. I think that you're such an herbal inspiration and you're so fun in the way that you approach your herbal practice, which is something we want to talk about today, bringing whimsy back into the herbal realm, which is really exciting. And I know this topic is going to be one that a lot of our listeners are going to look forward to. But I'd love you to backtrack a little and just introduce yourself and kind of your roots and how you came to herbalism.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. My name is Amma Rosavalon, and I am based out of Southern Oregon. I live in the mountains of Southern Oregon, which is a beautifully rich, biodiverse landscape. And I definitely credit these mountains and these lands with informing so much of my herbalism journey and who I am as an herbalist and how I relate to plants and life in general. I've lived here in Southern Oregon for 10 years now. I'm from California originally, from a totally different ecosystem and landscape. I grew up like a 5-minute walk from the beach. So I grew up coastal beach ecosystem and then always loved the mountains and the forest. And then in my adult life, found myself in this totally different region, which has the mountains and the forest, and just it feels like this is like where my soul is meant to live. This is the ecosystem that like most nourishes my soul and my being. And in terms of how I came to herbalism, there's the adult version of the timeline, but truthfully, I have to trace it back to childhood. I was lucky enough to be raised by parents who were very holistically minded and kind of ahead of their times. I was like the weird kid who wasn't allowed to watch TV and was a vegetarian and, was only wearing cotton clothing. And so I felt really weird as a child. But retrospectively, I see that this is where the true roots of my journey of living this kind of alternative pathway and living this life devoted to the plants were from. And so my childhood was, spent largely outside playing in the garden and talking to plants and talking to trees. And my mom, when I got sick as a kid, would, give me herbal remedies and flower essences. And, so there was just kind of this literacy that was already being formed even from a very young age of just being familiar with certain plants and herbs, and that those can be the things you reach to feel better, whether emotionally or physically. And so, that really, now getting that 2020 hindsight, I see, okay, that was the origin point in the beginning. But how I ended up on the herbalism path formally in my adult life was really just starting to kind of pursue the sort of alternative pathways of living and traveling a lot and kind of in this alternative hippie culture in the west coast of the US, festivals, whatnot. And so I was just kind of getting curious about the different elements of that. Okay, what is it to garden? What's permaculture? What's herbalism? Just tugging on all these different threads. And so I just, decided to sign up for herbalism school after years of being curious about it, and then kind of unexpectedly found myself completely falling in love with herbalism and with plants, and just like, the whole world just opening up to me. And that was here in Southern Oregon. So that's why I say that Southern Oregon really feels like, so much of it's informed so much of how I relate to the plants, because it was this landscape and these plants who really were my like formative teachers and guides into this realm of herbalism and plant medicine.
Mm-hmm. And I resonate so much with your story, actually. One, it makes me so excited when I get to interview people who kind of had that sort of alternative upbringing, because that's something I'm trying to give my son. And so I just get a little glimpse into his future, which is always exciting for me. But yeah, I just think your whole journey is exciting. And the fact that you didn't come to it from necessarily a health crisis is kind of in the minority. And I'm the same. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I always said I wanted to be a wizard or a spy. And I say that naturopathic medicine gave me a bit of both. And I found it in a book, and I went to herb school, and then I moved to naturopathic school, and then I, did the clinical route, and it wasn't because I was necessarily, although reflecting on it, there's things you could say that it definitely like changed my life, and it changes your life irrevocably forever. Like I always like to say that once you fall in love with herbal medicine, you never go back. It's always a part of who you are, and like the lens that you then see the rest of the world through forevermore. So thank you for sharing a bit about your story. And the landscape there sounds absolutely beautiful. So, obviously you've got quite a bit of training and you trained clinically. But something I love about your work so much is that it does feel so deeply rooted in relationship with the plants and ritual and connection with the land around you. Was there ever a point in your journey where you felt any tension between the clinical side of herbal medicine and then the more embodied, intuitive side of your practice?
I would say yes, and it was largely that tension was internal. And so what I can track in my journey is when I first started going to herbalism school, and then especially when I got to that second year, the clinical year, because the first year was foundational and a little bit more, had a little bit more open, but the second year was intensive. We had an in-person student clinic, and we were like doing school in the clinics. We were in the clinic, like no matter what, whether taking classes or seeing clients. And I know within myself in those years, I really had this like aversion and rejection to plant spirit medicine and the meditations and the more like woo-woo stuff. And I was just like, I want all the science. I want all the physiology, the pathophysiology. Like, I want to know why. And like, it was almost like I had something to prove within myself. And perhaps part of that is like the conditioning from society that's like, oh, like herbalism, it's this whatever. So I'm like, no, if I can figure out all the science and all the phytochemistry and like prove that this is legit and prove that this works. And so within myself, there was this like rejection of the woo, let's say, and of the magic and the ritual and the spirit. And, I was really can see how I was really kind of like overinflating that side for a few years. And then it was just kind of roundabout returning to the magic, which really just came from my own experiences of building relationships with plants and how the plants themselves will kind of weave the magic and the enchantment back into your life, whether you expect it or not. And so, I was very much focused on the clinical model and really trying to fit myself into a box of, okay, I've trained and I want to be a clinical herbalist and I want to present myself in a certain way and a layer of professionalism and really just trying to fit myself into this box. And then just kind of over time, the magic and the spirit started creeping in. And what started to become undeniable to me was the things that were transforming me the most, the aspects of the plants that were, creating the biggest transformation and shifting me the most and allowing me to learn the most were these relationships with the plants themselves, was learning to start to listen to the wisdom of the plants themselves, was, falling back in love with the earth, with the plants, becoming re-enchanted, allowing myself to reclaim the magic. And so it wasn't like there was a catalyst point where it suddenly shifted. I would say it was just kind of a slow shift that over time I started to kind of like just become a little bit more whimsical and a little bit more magical. And it's just kind of worked itself in more and more. And now I feel like I have this really beautiful fusion where it's like I can just do it all, and all of it is an important piece of the overall puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I completely agree with you. I think, and you see where it comes from, and it's a very common pathway for people. Because when I went into it, and my first studies, I went into Western herbal medicine, which doesn't exist anymore here in that way. In formal training anyway. Mm. And, Australia works off an evidence-based model now. So everything is evidence-based, which, I see great value in. And, you kind of fall into that pattern because you're listening to these teachers who are clinical teachers often and, have all this experience and they know the studies and they know the science. And then it becomes this like, yes, like this really does work. This should be respected. Like, why isn't this kind of healing craft being respected as much as, Western, conventional medicine, the way that it is now? And so you want to prove that and you want to share that information with people, but it does come at a cost sometimes of losing that sense of wonder in the world. And, it becomes quite, extractive, for a better term. And so, being able to deprogram once you come out of study and kind of find your way, if you're a kind of person who's receptive to listening to the messages of plants, it really, they guide you back every time. And so, you've touched on whimsy, I've touched on whimsy. I love kind of your Instagram is so fun. I enjoy your memes. That's how I first found you. I really admire the ability to put together a good meme. I don't think it's my strength, but I really love sharing them. And, you did a post on a case for romanticizing herbalism, which was just so spot on and fun. But I'd love to know kind of why you think wonder, play, and enchantment matter so much. So it's separate to necessarily like plant, spirit communication, but like why this sense of, whimsy and wonder and romanticizing, life comes into play in herbal practice and why it's important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, it just makes it more fun and joyful. And I think we need not overlook fun and joy in our lives.
100%.
The world is an insane place. And so staking our little claim of like, no, I am going to have some joy. I am going to have some enchantment amidst the insanity of the world is so, so important. But really it's enchantment and awe are like how we fall back in love with the earth. Like that is, how we can fall back in love with the earth and start to care about it again, which talking about just the greater patterns of society where it's sorely needed. We are so deeply disconnected from the world or from the earth, I should say, and how we can find our way back into caring about it truly is through falling in love with it. And how do we fall in love with it? Well, you go out and you have these profound experiences where you're just struck into a state of awe and wonder and enchantment. And of course you can just do that by going and walking outside and like being in the presence of like a waterfall or a giant tree or whatever. But also when you start to cultivate these relationships with plants specifically, that is such a doorway into enchantment. It's and beyond that, just you might be familiar with the term the wall of green, but it's this term that's been created to just describe how when the modern westernized human goes out into the forest or goes outside, they just see a wall of green. They don't see the diversity, the biodiversity of species of plant and animal and fungi. And so that's when we start to cultivate relationships and get to know the species that are around us. It no longer is just walking through a wall of green. It's walking through a landscape of personhood. And, oh, there's that being and there's that being. And when you start to get to know all the plants, then I've just noticed like the excitement that can come when you're taking a walk and you see the first yarrow blossom of the season, or you find a little fawn lily or whatever it might be. It's like, it brings this like childlike like wonder back into our lives to just be like enchanted with and amazed by the biodiversity of the earth. And the other thing I wanted to say to this point, just on like making a more like science-backed argument for it, is they have done studies on awe and wonder and how the states of awe and wonder impact our body, and they like shift markers positively in our well-being. The state of awe has been shown to lower inflammation, to activate the vagus nerve, which is needed to drop into our parasympathetic nervous system state, to reduce cortisol. Like the state of awe and wonder is scientifically proven to have a positive effect on your health. So I think also, when we're talking about using herbalism for, to support our well-being, using it for healing, like we should not overlook the value of paying attention to making sure we have enough beauty in our life, that we have that state of wonder and awe that we can come into from time to time, because it is quite positive for our health and well-being. So I think it works bi-directionally. We can see the benefit and the necessity of having enchantment and wonder and awe for our own health and well-being, whether that be physical, whether that be our mental health, which of course also going to affect us positively in our mental health, but also that it has this bidirectional positive effect where it's actually going to create a positive effect for the earth by way of the fact that the more humans that have these senses of wonder and awe and enchantment and deep love for the earth, the more there will be more of us who care about the earth and who want to, show up for the earth. And try and support and take care of and nourish and steward the earth in this world that is so damaging and detrimental for the environment, you know. Yeah.
Definitely, like, I love that you brought in the scientific moment there as well, because we do know science is only starting to scratch the surface of how much the brain is able to influence our physiology. And so it makes sense to me that those things would be helpful for good health and play a role in just basic foundational well-being. And it's, this wall of green concept I've definitely heard of before, and it's so true. I love, how exciting is it, as you said, when you see your motherwort pop up and you get so excited, or you see a patch of nettle that looks absolutely glorious. And something I want to say to that point is, I think, encouraging people, right? The more that we can encourage people with our voice to not worry about what other people think as well, the more you can really sink into this joy and wonder filled, existence. Because if you're too worried about what people think, you're not going to let yourself really enjoy that moment. And, I have always been kind of the odd duck in my family and, in our circle of people, especially my husband's side. And, when I get to go, so obviously I live in Australia, but my husband is Canadian. So, the plants that grow wild here are very different quite often to the plants, medicinal plants that are growing wild in North America. And so every time I go, I get so overwhelmed with excitement when I see like echinacea just growing on the side of the road, or motherwort, or nettles, or any of these things. Nettles grow here, but not in the same way. Yarrow doesn't really grow wild here. And so getting to reunite with those plant kin and I just let myself be excited and be happy about it. And then everyone else can go walk on ahead and I can have my moment with my plants. But also what's fun about that is it opens conversations sometimes with people as well, to be able to bring them into your world a little bit and share that joy with them. So I really love that idea, and it really is a big theme that's been coming through in every episode recently, has been how relationship with plants is really the antidote for loneliness. Yeah. And when you get to know all of those beings in a forest, man, how could you ever feel alone, right?
Totally, exactly. I was in Europe for a few weeks recently, and obviously a lot of the plants that grow here in North America like came over with the Europeans, although some of them just grow natively in both areas. But just being in Europe and just walking any path I walked, there was my friends. And I was just thinking about how the more plants we know, the deeper our sense of belonging almost, and that we can like go anywhere and like see a familiar face, just in the way that like if you went to a giant party and you didn't know anyone versus if you went to a giant party and you had one friend there, you would just feel a little bit more comfortable, like, oh, I got that friend. And it's the same way with the plants, then we start to, have this sense of familiarity and belonging anywhere we go. And that's so beautiful, because I really think once again, like the modern kind of westernized human has forgotten their inherent belonging. Mm-hmm. And plants are a way that we can weave ourselves back into that sense of belonging, of like, oh yeah, I'm a part of this too. Like, these are my friends.
Yes.
They grow everywhere.
It transcends language too. Like, it transcends like the verbal language. So, you can have a conversation and feel at peace and at ease no matter where you are with plants, because they, the communication doesn't need to be necessarily spoken out loud to understand each other. So that's really special. And, we talk about embodied herbalism, right? So what does that mean to you? Because that's a big part of the way that you work, is with this embodied intuitive herbalism. So could you explain that to us?
Yeah, totally. I feel like I kind of have a twofold meaning to it. And so like the first aspect of it is just simply like looking at learning through the body, through observation. And so of course it can, be on the more intuitive side of things, but also when we just talk about such a key element of herbalism, right? Of the herbal energetics and the tissue states, and understanding the energetics of the plants, understanding the energetics of different conditions and imbalances that arise within the body. so much of how we learn that is through observation of, like, through somatic observation, I should say, because you can talk to someone about herbal energetics all day, but until they actually have the experience of, like, oh, this is what bitter is, this is what pungent is, this is constriction, this is laxity, like, these concepts are so much more easily learned through observation of the body, through allowing the body to just kind of observe, allowing the body to, to be the lens in a way, and so that's a big aspect of what I mean when I say embodied herbalism is just learning all of these herbal concepts through the experience of your body meeting the plants, because that's really what's happening. Like, let's not forget, it's like we're taking a plant into our body, and then our body is having an interaction with this plant on a very literal level, with the constituents and the molecules interacting with our body, but also on this like layered spirit level. It's both. And so when we're getting to know plants, doing this through our body, through taking plants into our body and seeing what happens physically, emotionally, energetically, like all the different layers, because there's only so far you can get reading about it. The real deep anchored learning happens through actually embodying it and being with it. So that's in large part what I mean when I say embodied herbalism. But there's another layer that I've been thinking of more often, which is, for those of us who are herbalists, for those of us who are plant stewards and people of the plants, what is it to embody herbalism? What is it to live our lives, in an herbalist way? What does it look like to live herbalism, to embody herbalism? How can we let that inform the entirety of our lives versus just like the interactions with the plants? Because as I've been kind of like, mulling over this concept recently, I'm like, oh yeah, it really can actually percolate and spread out into the rest of our lives. And we can like embody these principles, these practices in all areas of our life. So
I love that so much. And completely agree with that too. I think, is herbalism, the herbalists, the midwives, the medicine women, the medicine men, wisdom keepers of communities really were like stewards of communities, right? Stewarding, community spirit, stewarding the health of their communities. And so embodying herbalism in that, from that perspective, absolutely makes sense to me. And I'm really glad that you shared that. That's something I think is going to plant a seed for a lot of people and just shift the way that we look at our craft. And I think that comes into, we talk about witchcraft quite often here on the podcast. And that comes in with that, like your spiritual craft as well, right? Like how are we showing up in the world? What influence are we having on the people and the plants around us? How can we leave this world a better place than we came into it? And, what are our responsibilities as people who are interacting and living in these spaces? So I think that that's really an important message to share. Thank you.
Yeah.
And alongside that, and kind of what we've already talked about, is the concept of animism. And it's a concept that I'm wanting to explore more here on the pod about, what I like to ask people what that looks like for them. Well, how does animism play a role in your life, in your practice? What is your relationship with that concept and that idea? So could you share that with us?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think animism is such an important piece of the conversation when it comes to herbalism. I always try and throw it in my educational offerings. And in terms of what that means for me, I mean, once again, I just have to go all the way back to childhood, and I'm just have this good fortune of being, raised by parents who, I don't know if they identified as such, but had a very animistic worldview. And so my earliest understandings of relating to the world around me were that of an animist viewpoint, because that is, how my parents kind of taught me. And really truthfully, it's just lasted the entire time. I don't think there's ever been a point where I haven't believed that everything in the world has a spirit of sorts, and to have respect and awareness for the spirits of everything, and the mystery of what exactly that is. Like, animism also feels mysterious to me. It's like the knowing, okay, everything is alive and animate and has a spirit and has wisdom, and and that's and it's
and
the great
next?
mystery, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I think I've carried that viewpoint for my whole life, and then really started to focus on the value of what that means now that I'm in this herbalism field, and serving as a conduit and a guide for other people to come into the field. And I want that to be the first gateway that people walk through when they're getting curious about the plants, is like, hey, let's have the awareness that these are beings that are alive and have a spirit and have wisdom of some sort. Let's at least get curious about it. Even if we're not going to full-blown believe in animism, let's just get curious about what if. Maybe, that alone is so important. So yeah. And in terms of like did you ask what that looks like for me, or? Yeah. I mean, I guess in the most simple sense, it's how I walk through the world, how I walk through nature. I greet things. I say hi to things. I try and walk with a light foot and come respectfully. And for me personally, I'm not, big on the like big spoken out loud like prayers and rituals and whatever. That's just never felt like natural for me. What feels most natural for me in relating to the world, like as an animist, is just giving like the gift of my attention. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, she talks about that a lot, about how paying attention is this beautiful gift that we can give to the earth. And that's what feels like the most natural for me, is to just pay attention. So just like, oh, there's this bird that flew up, I'm just gonna like sit and watch it and just give it my attention. And same with the plants. Just if I'm going out to wildcraft and harvest, or even just harvest from a garden, just sitting with the plant first, really looking at it, really admiring its beauty, really just being with it with the entirety of my attention is what feels most natural for me to relate to the world and like be in an interaction with the animate living world. Yeah.
And I think you're spot on there, especially in the world that we live in now, where attention span is at an all-time low in a terrifying way. that is absolutely, regardless of whether it was a big ceremony or not, that is our time and our attention is the best gift we could be offering. Is because that is such a commodity now. Like, that is just not something that people give very freely unless it's to scrolling on a phone. And so if we can save some of that attention and bring it back to our earthly kin, then that is, I think, a wonderful way to approach that. And so if people are maybe new to this path and maybe are exploring animism and, these concepts of, relationship with plants for the first time, are there any little tips you have that are practical ways or really simple ways they can start to bring this into their own lives?
Well, yes. And the first thing I would say is what I just said of curiosity. Like, that, I think, is the very first step, is just curiosity. And of course, your attention. That's the first step, is just getting curious, especially if you're new to it and it feels foreign and weird, and like, just simply going outside and being curious is probably the very first step of just taking your nature walk and just taking the time to slow down and pause and get curious. Oh, okay, like there's this moss on that tree and like an interesting color. I wonder how it, like the curiosity is really just like that ignition point, But beyond that, in terms of like practical ways, I'm really a big fan of working with one plant at a time. So just creating a relationship with a plant for a set period of time is a beautiful way to go about starting to foster that connection of, okay, I'm just gonna, be really curious about like the rose bush in my backyard, and whatever that looks like for you. So maybe it's an artistic person, so maybe their lens of creating connection would be through making art and going out and drawing or sketching it. Or if they're a songwriter, like seeing if a song wants to come through. Maybe if the person's a little bit more like nerdy brainiac type, that would mean like, okay, like get on the internet, start researching, like what are the constituents of this plant? Have any interesting studies been done on this plant? And anything in between, but just starting to cultivate connection and starting to get to know a plant and create this relationship. And then most importantly, just go outside and have experiences with it if you're lucky enough to have it growing around you. Of course, you can do this with a plant that is not growing around you. You could do this with, get a jar of whatever dried herb it is you want to work with and just drink the tea of that plant. And that's a doorway into that. But yeah, I think, in order to build relationship, it's like we have to quite literally create a relationship. And we do that with, once again, our attention, our time, carving out some time to have that connection, to cultivate that connection, whatever that might look like for you. Yeah.
And you can look at it just like building relationship with a friend that's human, right? Is, you don't just expect, you don't meet somebody on the street and then the next day you're like, hey, can you like bake my birthday cake and take my kids for a day? Or, you really have to put some time and intention into building that relationship. You ask them questions, you get to know them, maybe you have them over to your house, maybe you give them some tea, and, that's exactly the same with plants. It doesn't have to be so complicated. I like, that you are saying that the curiosity is a huge piece, because that's also how I would approach it, is just, as you said earlier, learning to fall back in love with the world around you, because I think so many of us have lost that joy for life, that zest, that passion, where if we can reclaim a bit of that desire and that excitement and just wanting to give yourself fully to something that is going to be a positive influence in your life, I think that is so important. And that could even look like falling in love with food and cooking. Like, that's a big part of my story. But whatever that looks like, you can bring the plants in. So thank you. And so I would love to know too, this is the hardest question, I know, but because it's like picking a favorite child, but are there any, I'm not asking your favorite, but are there any plant kin that you feel extra connected to, that you have a special story with, or that come up for you time and time again that you couldn't live without?
It's like the ultimate herbalist trick question is like, pick a favorite. Like, it's absolutely impossible. But yes, I do have some that have, been around for a long time. I will say, since forever, I was like enamored with roses. It's part of my middle name, Rosavalon. And I don't know, but I'm not really so much to do with the name. I think just to do with how beautiful roses are and how good they smell. And just for as long as I can remember, little kid, I was so enamored with roses. So roses have been the lifelong love affair for sure. And yeah, then coming to herbalism and getting to understand the medicine of the rose and in its entirety and full spectrumness has been really profound, because then I've started to learn like, oh wow, this is actually like a really important plant for me specifically, and my constitution and some of the imbalances I tend towards physically, and then also like energetically and emotionally. I've had a lot to learn about boundaries in my life, and rose is a very good plant to support us in shoring up our boundaries, both, physiologically and then also energetically and spiritually. So rose has been a big lifelong teacher for me. And then let's see who else. Mugwort is another really profound. Mugwort's definitely the plant that kind of facilitated me into kind of what we were talking about earlier, of like starting to open up beyond just the clinical, lens into like, oh, ooh, okay, like these are actually pretty wise magical beings. And mugwort is definitely the plant that kind of was the first one to really teach me that I had like a pretty profound experience with. And so mugwort is a big, powerful ally of mine for sure. And then there's like the practical ones where it's like, well, I just always come to that plant for my body, not necessarily. I would say like with plants like rose and mugwort, it's like, yes, it's the medicine, but it's also like the being of the plant. But then there's plants that are just have been like really practically useful for me and really supportive for me. So marshmallow root is like, I tend to run dry, I tend to run hot, and so marshmallow root is just like the godsend for me that I so often put in different formulas and just call upon often in my life and in my own practice, because it's really that like moistening, soothing quality is so needed for my body. So marshmallow root, and then the final one I'll say is oat straw, milky oats. That also, on a like practical physiological level, that plant has been, very, very supportive for me over the years. And I could go on for hours, but
I know it's the trick, it's the trap question.
Yeah.
I love the marshmallow root. I feel like that's 1 point for marshmallow root. I feel like nobody else has brought that up yet. But oat straw is one that's coming up a lot more. Milky oats as a plant, and it's one of my personal close allies. Yeah. And has been for a long time. And I was doing a podcast episode with a friend of mine who's been on here quite a few times, and we were talking about some of our favorite plants to work with, and I said oats, and she went, really? And I went, yeah, what do you mean, really? Like, of course. Because I just think what an accessible medicine as well. And I like that you brought up rose and mugwort in kind of like a separate category, because I do think that there are some plants that come up for almost every single herbalist for a reason. I think that there are some plants that are not only very generous, tend to, like, mugwort grows prolifically. St. John's wort grows prolifically. Like, there are a few herbs that are just, prolific in their nature. And I think of them as the very generous herbs. Like, there are just some where you don't really have to worry too much about, nurturing them, because they just will take over a garden in no time. The mints are kind of like that, but they're very generous teachers as well. And so they can transform our lives in ways that maybe we don't always have those experiences with other plants. It depends on which plant is meant for you. Whereas those plants kind of across the board will have influences for people. And so I think that they come up so frequently, but they also are almost all boundary plants in some way, which I love, because I think, it's preparing us for our journeys, which is great. Yeah. And I'd love to also know, are there any plant spirit stories that you have to share? Is there anything any experience you've had with a plant that's really completely changed you on a very core level?
Yeah, I mean, the story that just immediately just like comes rushing into my mind is actually one that just happened very recently. When it's actually a tree spirit story, I guess.
Wow.
But I was in Europe, like I mentioned, and I was like, being the plant nerd that I am, was just trying to go to all the botanical gardens I could over there, because they have just the most epic botanical gardens. Like, we really don't have anything like that in the States, as far as I know. So I went to a variety of botanical gardens with just all these like epic, crazy, exotic plants, and really mind-blowing. And I was at the Kew Botanic Gardens in England, and just kind of wandering the grounds. It's massive. It would probably take like 5 days to see the whole thing. And there on the grounds are some of the biggest oak trees I've ever seen. Just like massive. I mean, we have oaks here in North America. The oak has definitely been around for my whole life as like this presence. And so there was just this massive oak that I was like, I need to walk up to this. And I'm like, whatever, it doesn't matter if people see me. I'm like, walked up to this oak and put my head on it, my hands on it. And and I rarely have these experiences with plants. It's not so often I have these experiences. It seems like some people are very like clairaudient and they hear the plants all the time. I don't tend to be that way, but I put my head and my hands on this oak and it just came right into my awareness and my mind. And it was, obviously I can't put exactly into words what it said to me, but it was something along the lines of, you are moving way too fast. And you little human don't have any idea what time feels like for me, who has been here for hundreds of years. And like time for me is so dilated and so slow. But you are moving so fast that you are speeding up your experience. And if you slow down, you can also dilate your time and slow down your experience. But you're going so fast that you're making this whole thing very fast. And that felt very true. I was like, shit. You're right. I do move fast, and I always have been that way. And I walk fast, I move fast. I always just kind of am like in a hurry, even though I shouldn't be. And yeah, it really felt like it was like, hey, and then it was just also kind of funny to me because I'd seen, just like across these different botanic gardens, like hundreds of these like crazy exotic plants, and then it's just the oak tree, that like had this profound experience with, which is often that way, kind of like you were just speaking to, with these like weeds, these plants that just grow prolifically everywhere, and then they often end up being the ones that grab us and that we have the most profound experiences with. And then you just hear like everyone on your podcast says like, a couple of these main plants, and with those herbs you were naming, I kind of think of them as like ambassadors for herbalism. But with these trees, we don't necessarily think of tree medicine as often in herbalism, although of course it is. We have hawthorn, we have linden. I mean, we have all these profound tree medicines in herbalism. But so obviously you can use oak medicinally in herbalism, very astringent. I don't personally, I haven't really used it that much in my practice, but yeah, it was just this exactly. And now I've gotten quite curious about it, and the land I live on is oak savanna. It's mostly oaks. It kind of like meets the forest at the edge of the property, but mostly oaks. And then growing up in Southern California, like we don't have forests. We have oak savanna in Southern California. So the oak has really kind of been there all along. So that's the most recent, plant spirit moment I've had, which it was impactful. I was like, wow, okay. And I've really tried to hold that in my mind now, walking forward in my life, and like take the advice, because I'm like, the tree is right. I am moving way too fast. And it's true that I'm speeding up the whole experience by not just like slowing down and being present with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important message for pretty much everybody. So thank you for sharing that with us, because it's something we can all take something away from and start to implement, because I too move way too fast. And it's so true. When you go, like, let's say you go away for a weekend and you just slow down and you just like mosey and you make a breakfast from scratch and you do all these things. You maybe watch a movie and you pull some cards and you realize, wow, I have so much time in the day. Yeah. And obviously there's work taken out of that, right, equation. But I do think if we can slow down, it does create more space for pleasure and enjoyment and getting more richness out of our everyday experience. So that's a really great message, even if it was a little sharp. But that's the way the plants work. We wouldn't want them any other way.
They work. Exactly.
If there's a message that's so important that they have to communicate with you like that, then it needs to be, a big one.
Yeah, because let's not forget, they're far older than us. That's one thing I always like to point out to people when I'm teaching, is like, if I'm teaching about a plant, to name like, well, here's how long we think this plant has been here for, because it's oftentimes millions of years. And so they are our elders, they have been here longer. They have been doing the earth thing for longer than we have. So chances are, just like our human elders, they have some wisdom they've gleaned in that time.
Mm-hmm. And just like the herbal youths, we need to learn to listen and appreciate the messages that our grandparents tell us, right?
Exactly.
And I'd love to end on a fun question. I'd love to know, are there any little whimsical rituals you include? We're big on daily ritual around here. So are there any little, rituals or little experiences you create throughout your day that, bring you joy and that you wouldn't want to live without?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of the day to day, just once again, like we were talking about with the paying attention, like I really try and be enchanted. Like, and I think, enchantment can sometimes find us, but we also have to take space and create space for it. So I really try and go outside every day and allow myself to be enchanted. And so maybe it's the hummingbirds coming to my hummingbird feeder. Maybe it's the honeybees. For a while, there's a seasonal pond that's right outside my house. It's dry now because it's summer, but in the mornings there was this like mama and papa duck that would come every morning and
Cute.
eat whatever it is they eat out of the ponds. And I really try and like set the intention to allow myself to be enchanted and create the space for to create the space so I can notice things and be enchanted. The other thing I want to mention, just because we've talked about like romanticizing herbalism and enchantment and falling back in love, is one thing I really like to do when I'm going out into, for a day in nature, going out to the woods, is to kind of get myself ready like I'm going on a date. Like I kind of treat it like I'm going on a date with the earth, or a date with like whatever plant it is I'm going to harvest. So I put on makeup, I put on a cute outfit, like I like get myself ready to go, have this magical experience in out in the woods or the mountains or wherever it is I'm going. And I really treat it like that. I treat it with that intention and that romanticism and that whimsy, let's say. And I find it makes it quite a bit more magical and fun. And, then you're just like dressed up in the woods. Like playing dress up is fun. And that we can like bring that playfulness, right? We can like bring these elements of playfulness into how we relate with the earth and the plants. So that's the other thing. Obviously that doesn't happen every day, but I did want to bring that in.
No, I think it's great. And I think that also shows great reverence for the natural world. Like, again, it's bringing your attention and your time and your intention and thoughtfulness into it, as well as fun. And I think just from what we've talked about today, if there's any one message that I would like people to get from my conversation with you, would be to have fun with your practice. And it doesn't have to be serious all of the time. And sometimes you can get a deeper experience just from letting yourself be in the moment and have some joy around what you're doing. And so I'm definitely going to be, I actually do that quite often. I'm known to hike mostly in dresses.
Yes.
And that's fine with me. So people, I've been talking on the internet, this is a segue, about, can we actually work out in like non-workout clothes? Like, can we do exercise or, do activity in clothing that isn't like spandex and leggings? And I 100% think we should be doing that. Why are we waiting? Like, why are we wearing specific clothes for specific occasions? I'm a big proponent of wearing the things that you love in your closet just because you love them instead of saving them for special occasions. So,
exactly.
Whatever we deem as a special occasion, I think going into the woods is absolutely a special occasion.
I was about to say.
Sometimes it just, people have never thought about it that way before. It can take a moment to wrap your mind around, but I think that is great advice. So that's excellent. And I think, people listening to the way that you're talking, you speak so well and you speak with so much enthusiasm about the plants, and it's contagious. And I think that shows through all facets of your work. But if people are wanting to work with you and they're wanting to engage with what you're offering, could you tell us a bit about where they can find you and what you have on offer at the moment?
Totally. Yeah. Well, the best place to find me on social media is Instagram, and my handle is at mama.amma, but mama is spelled MAMMA. So on Instagram, I post all kinds of variety of fun things, and also educational things, and also sometimes reverent things. So that's the best way to find me. I also have a website, which is just ammarosavalon.com, which you can find a little bit more about me. And then also you can find my offerings. And in terms of ways to work with me, the most easy pathway in is I have a monthly membership. And I'm announce this here because I imagine it's not going to get posted right away, but I'm about to do a name change. So I've been operating under a few different things, have been under this ecosystem of Herb Babe, but I've just feeling this evolution. And so the membership is going to be, the name will be changed to the Living Herbalism Collective. Kind of a note to what we were talking about earlier, just that intention of like, what is it to really live it? So the Living Herbalism Collective is my monthly membership. In the membership, we study one plant per month. So this is a great way to just get that foot in the door. Or if you're already an herbalist and you just like want a little bit of studies in your monthly rhythm. So we study one plant a month. I do like an hour to an hour and a half long class on that plant. I provide tincture recipes and tea recipes and different herbal medicine recipes, practices, a guided meditation. And then I bring in a guest teacher every month to teach on something that's complementary in some way to that plant. So those will range. We've had people come in and teach about like incense and aromatics. We've had people come in and teach about like earth-based ritual. It ranges. So that's a great way to find me. And then a few times a year, I do offer like deeper dive, longer form courses. So every fall, I offer a course called Embodied Herbalism, which is a month-long course where we really have a chance to work with plants in our body and kind of like deepening that body literacy like we were talking about. And then the other course I do is now going to be called the Living Herbalism Academy. And that is a 10-week foundational herbalism course that, once again, really just like everything we've talked about today, touches, of course, like goes into the science and the practical explanations of everything. And then also is woven into the folklore and the plant's wisdom and really that full spectrum. So those are some ways to work with me.
And they're beautiful ways to work with you. And I want to let people know that I think even for myself, obviously I have a bachelor degree in naturopathic medicine, and I still need help focusing on one plant at a time. And so, I think a monthly membership can be so helpful, and it can be like your accountability buddy for slowing down and taking time with one plant, because it's so easy, especially with this age of the internet, to be exposed to like 100 different herbs a week. And then you're like, oh, that's really cool. And I should remember that for later, but I'm probably not going to. And like, I want to try this plant, but then I got distracted. And so I think having that focus point and being able to like have people completely immersed with you alongside you while you're doing it has proven to be very helpful for myself. So I wanted to make that point. I think that those can be really wonderful ways to begin to deepen your practice with individual plants. I think it's very helpful.
Absolutely. It's something I believe to be true. It's something that many of my teachers taught me, is it's far better to know like 10 plants really well than it is to know like 100 plants kinda. Like you can do a lot more with knowing a small amount of plants really, really deeply. So it is a valuable way to go about things.
And thank you just so much for your time today. It's been such a pleasure getting to speak with you. And again, I really resonate with the way that you walk through the world and what you bring to this space and the way that you practice and live your life. So it's been wonderful to speak to somebody who's so like-minded. And I will, of course, put all of your links in the show notes so that people can find you, find your courses, find your membership. And I really do encourage everybody to go find you on Instagram, because you're one of my favorite accounts. And, that's a big part of why I wanted to chat with you today. Just, I think that you're bringing work to the world and to the online space that is just so very needed in this day and age. So again, just appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be on your podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm glad that you wanted to talk about like this specific area of topics, because it's so fun to just have a conversation about all of these topics, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Your support means the world to me, and if you have a free moment and would like to leave a review, a comment, or a rating on your platform of choice, that would go a long way towards helping me to grow the podcast and reach more people. If you aren't already subscribed, check out my Substack newsletter. Over there, I share lots of free resources, as well as an option to join as a paid subscriber, which is another beautiful way you can support my work. May what you've heard today guide you in living a little more slowly and a little more connected.